From my very first days in the hobby, blending was seen as the next step in terms of painting and how you would improve as a painter. Moving on from beginner techniques such as dry brushing and washes. Horrible to have to say that, isn't it? Hopefully we've done something about that. They were seen as beginner techniques. After you've mastered those, maybe you would try out blending. And what we're talking about here is blending from one color to another. You could be blending of colors on the way, but I mean going from this to this with some type of transition in the middle, not just like black, gray, white. Black becomes gray, becomes white. So this was seen as like an advanced technique, slightly intimidating, and when people could do it, it was seen as fancy and amazing. It does look really good, but yeah, a lot of people were too intimidated to try it. In this tutorial, we're going to show you 3 simple ways, they're quite quick as well, to attempt blending: wash, stipple, and glaze. Spoiler, yes, we're using dry brushing. Yes, stippling is my favorite. Combining them though, also spoiler, is the absolute superpower as far as blending goes. It doesn't make it more complicated, it makes it more forgiving, and it means you can do more faster in a way that I would say is kind of more fun and more organic. So if you're looking to get armies on the table, great, but also if you're looking to kind of cheat your way to a better end result fairly effectively and fast, or slow it down and do it amazingly, it's also great. Please don't leave if you think the idea of blending is scary. We're doing most of these 3 ways in 1 to 2 minutes. I know the tutorial is long, but that's because we've got some examples at the end which haven't been cut or particularly edited really, of me showing you like the start to finish process to answer any additional questions that you may have there. We've done it on terrain. I'd recommend doing that. You can do it in black and white, just do it between a couple of colors like we are. Makes it simpler, makes it more approachable, and doing it on something slightly larger for the first time might also help you out as well. Like something large, blocky and square, there's ours down there, absolutely perfect. As I've touched on, if you're wondering about the length of the video, we're going to show you most of the stuff you need in 10 minutes. The rest is me kind of rolling out and showing you the technique. We're going to answer a load of questions because we asked you, the viewers, what questions you had about blending. If you've got any questions that we don't answer though, pop them down below, along with a suggestion of what you would like to see us cover next. All right, that's it. Let's jump in. Let us know which of them is your favorite or which one you're going to try out. And if you do try it out and it goes well or not well, let us know and we'll do our best to help you out there. Let's jump in. So what we're going to cover here pretty fast, hopefully, is a couple of different ways to do blending and then some significant ways that you can make your blending look better than it is without actually needing to improve your blending. These are finishing steps. They are magic. They'll be coming up after we've done the blending, and they could very well change the way that you paint for a very long time. So let's jump straight in. Blending, so going from one color to another or transitioning, is one of the things that will make your painting look quite a bit fancier than it is. And also some people find it scary as a concept. Now, these days, semi-transparency is a thing everywhere in the hobby. So you can add contrast medium to stuff to dilute it. You can add lamium medium to stuff. You can just use shades, or you can thin your paints. There's a lot of different ways to stop your paints from being opaque. I'm going to cover a stippling one, super easy, glazing, super easy, and using washes, also super easy. And much like our last video, we're not concentrating on getting stuff perfect at all. So for each of these sections here, what I'm going to do, hopefully this will show up just with water, is we're going to end up with the bottom of it, the bit that's shiny there, looking darker than the top, because I think that would look cool. Or you could have the middle of them. You can pick anything, it's up to you. So they're looking a little bit rough already, because I've already started experimenting on them before deciding to record this. So let's jump into some quick and easy ways to get a transition from what it is to probably a blue. Number 1, nice and easy. We're just going to use a shade. Let me grab a slightly smaller brush. So got Drakenhof Nightshade here. We can dilute it a little bit more if we want with either of our mediums. And then I'm going to let gravity help me. I'm just going to pull it downwards, and I can actually choose to deposit a little bit more at the bottom there than naturally would go on. I need to be a bit careful with that, because you don't want a huge pooling section, but if you want, you can artificially pop that there. Wash my brush, just with water, and I'm going to fuzz out the top. So now we've got the one bit where we went from nothing to some, we fixed with a little bit of a wet transition. We're going to let that dry, see how it looks. Okay, so there's a little bit of a line there. That's okay. I'm just going to repeat a similar step. What I'm going to do is I'm going to more actively fuzz it out. So working fairly quick. Wash my brush. Of course, you can make sure that we've not got too much there. Okay, so that blend isn't perfect, but that's absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is going to take some, dilute it with water, and then I'm going to do a soft one all the way down. This is very soft, but what it's going to mean is that no area of that has 0 on, and that should help us kind of hide a little bit of the transition that we've got going on there. You can take more steps if you want to be more gentle, but that's not the point of this tutorial. So that's method 1. Don't worry if it doesn't look perfect. Let's move on to method 2. So what I am going to do is I'm going to stipple this, a bit of water in my dampening pad, about that much. Finger is slightly shiny. That's a little bit more than I'd use normally. Hopefully you can see how much is coming off on the palette. Then I'm going to take a little bit of Huldra Blue. Do this over silver so you can see what's going on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of thin things down using the dampening pad until it looks like this. So basically that's quite a lot like the glaze we put on with the brush, but we're going to stipple it. Put it more on the bottom than the top. Let your stages dry. They will take no time at all to dry. That's already dry. Don't agitate that layer before it's dried. That's the biggest mistake you can make, and it's the easiest one to not make because you just look at it. All right, it's dry. We can go again now. So over that, I will put a little bit more lower down. Then what I'm going to do is, much like we did with the brush, I'm going to dilute it. And that area where we don't have a soft transition, right? How much work does that do? You can carefully make things darker or exaggerate them. And all you do is you take the same brush and you dilute what's on it. If you've added water, obviously that's going to be softer than it was. This is one of my preferred ways. I find it's really forgiving, and because it's already like a random pattern or a patina to it from the bristles of the dry brush, you get a very natural fade pretty easily. It's pretty forgiving. Now, of course, if we wanted to make the bottom really dark, it's just a matter of repeating. And of course, you can mix these techniques. So if I wanted to soften that transition with this, you absolutely can. Very easy, very approachable. Nothing that you really need to worry about too much. Now, what if you want to do kind of old school, proper painty glazes? By that, what I mean is we're not going to allow pooling here. We're going to try and keep these very thin and consistent. We're not using a wash. So I'm going to take quite a lot of it off my brush. You can see it's quite dilute. We're going to do exactly what we did on this one, but we're probably just a bit more subtle, and it might take a little bit more time too. Pushing down, ending our stroke where we want it the darkest, very important. Let's apply some math. So let's say that we're going to do one step covering nearly all of this. We'll do a second one less, third one less, fourth one less, fifth one less. This has got 5 times the strength that that does. So we've got, there's quite a lot of variety in there. And all we have to do is make sure that we hold in mind where our first stage started. So that one's nearly all of it. I'm going to go like 5 steps down this, repeat, 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 repeat. And the barrier between the two will probably not be noticeable between one step and the next step, but we will get a fade from lighter to darker. Note with this one, if you do use a hairdryer or something that's going to make your model warm, that will affect how your glazes behave. They'll dry it a lot faster. So you can use your hairdryer if you are using one without the heat on, or you can just blow on it like I am and get really lightheaded. Third one. Fourth. This is by far the most controllable. It mixes really well with the other two. It's very much like this one, it's just a slower, steadier, more old-fashioned one, not using washes. But with this one, we went fast and loose and we got the slightly interesting pattern of the stippling. Now we can exaggerate it with glazing, which is awesome. So if we really want to push the very bottom of this, we can do that in a controlled fashion. Also, you don't need to prepare your brush often because you're not covering like a massive area with it. You could just carry on going with the same brush. So while the number of steps is there, the complexity isn't really, because your brush is prepared, you don't have to make the mix multiple times, and you can fix things or cater them to whatever your taste is for that area of the model. I could do the opposite. I could just shade the edge, I could just shade the middle, etc. We'll talk a little bit about push-pull, then we'll move on to our magic tricks. So when I pulled my paint down here and lifted off, there is the most at the end. I can do the same with pushing, and often I'd use that into recesses. So I want to end my stroke where it's the darkest. And if I wanted to fade up to this detail, that knowledge of how the brush is going to behave is giving me a much more forgiving time. If I don't draw a line around it like that, if I push into it, we get this kind of natural fade going on, and it makes us look like better painters than we are. All we did is consider how the brush works and where the wash, the liquid, is going to be deposited the most. Okay, so my brush is beginning to run out of paint now. I can see it displaying. Not that it's a brush that's pretty old. It's seen better days. So we've achieved that. We've got some okay transitions. We could exaggerate these more, which I'm quickly going to do. I want the bottoms really dark. Okay, now we might be pleased with that. That's great. If it is, you could edge highlight it. You know, we could quickly run around that. And things would look amazing. The reason for this, and this is cheating, we're already on to the next step. People are going to look at the edge of that. They won't look at the fade in the middle nearly as much. Like you're gonna start criticizing this one because there's nothing for you to concentrate on but the blend. The moment I do this is absolute magic, by the way. The moment I do this, you're going to look at that. You can also do this with dry brushing. And the dry brushing is going to affect all of it. So let's get a little bit more technical. Let's take out the same brush that we had. I'm going to see how much blue is left in it first. A little bit, not too much. Right, we're going to take a little bit of our silver, and it's very important to prepare our brush carefully. So I've got a tiny amount, just hit on the very end of the brush. See how much is coming off. This is a strong one. I'm using my general silver of choice, which is potent. Test it here on the texture. I think I want it diluted a little bit more than that. It's all about the testing here, guys. Okay, right, we've got what we want, which is my skin's features are being picked out. You can still see the wrinkles. There's nothing there, or I can test it on my texture palette against the details we've provided, or your paint and your history is provided. Either is good. So we can do this with a dry brush. You can hit those edges. Direction is important. And what this will do that edging won't do, which doesn't make it better or worse, it's just different, is it will slightly transition into the middle of that section. We also have the option to exaggerate with some stippling with the same brush, just like we did here at the bottom, at the top, to make the top of this section lighter. Again, you're not thinking about that fade now, and we've exaggerated the highlight. This is utter magic. If everyone did this, your painting would look better, easier, you wouldn't criticize your own blends as much. These are incredible tips, and these are tips that we always teach when we're with people in person. So let's try and bring this one up using both. Stipple at the top. Carefully, you know, I'm changing my pressure as I get lower, less will come off. We can softly buff all of these up. Hit the bottom a bit too much there. Lick my finger, wipe it off. We don't have to worry about mistakes. And this one, now I'm really confident with how the brush is prepared. I think this is going to look the best. Could additionally edge highlight this afterwards. We'll see if I want to do that. But we don't necessarily need to. All right. They were all done different ways. They all look pretty similar. We even use different paints on them. Guys, you do not need to worry about obsessing about your stuff being perfect. Not one bit, all right? It's just not necessary in this hobby. You can fix stuff easily. You can take your highlights higher if you've made a mistake that you want to hide. You could go back in and stipple some shades if you wanted to make it darker again. And at the end of the day, especially on details like this that are pretty blunt and big, you've always got edge highlighting that you can hide any mistakes behind, or you've got battle damage. You got everything. You got streaking grime. Finishing processes are magic, and they are underrated. And while you're worrying that your current thing isn't perfect, you could literally just be enjoying the next step, making your model look better, hiding those mistakes, as well as enhancing what you got. And you could be enjoying your hobby. So that's what we're all about here. That is it. I've given you all the information you need there about blending. To show you the flexibility of this again, the glazing that we did at the bottom there, we stippled at the top of these, we can glaze at the top of them too. So we're going to take the same technique, we're going to use it into reverse, we're going to push up to the top. Now, while none of those are perfect, I'm pretty pleased with a load of them. We've got some slips, doesn't actually matter that much, really not the end of the world, and if we want to fix them we can. You know, maybe some stippling there would help with that one. All right, you can apply that to all of your models. Please let us know if you found this useful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and I'm going to apply these same steps on this chunky boy, maybe on this side where I've not experimented all over it. We're going to do something special here. We're just using these techniques. We use these colors for the metal bit too, so you know exactly the same colors we used. And yeah, let's kind of ride this one out and try and get something fancy looking. All right, that's it. You've seen the 3 techniques. You see me combining them for kind of like the superpower, especially if you're starting off stippling, which is the fastest of them, I would say, and then using the others afterwards, the glazing or the washes, or washing with glazes, you know, whichever, doesn't really matter, or adding in paint into your glazes, whatever you want to do. It's a really, really efficient way to go about doing things. You can slow it down if you want to use that to help you get fancier results as well. One thing I really want to push on you guys, again, for like the 50th time in this is, don't worry about it looking perfect. That looks great there. That is all we need to achieve. The strength of this technique isn't that it's going to give you flawless, amazing, perfect blends. You can do that with it if you want, but it's that overall the effect is going to really, really work. So this looks great here. We're fine with that. As I get closer, and this doesn't make me think less of it, we're going to see that it's actually a little bit blotchy and there's patches here and there and there's imperfections. That's cool. That's fine. It's just part of the technique. If you're going to judge your mini, don't start beating yourself up from here because your glaze isn't perfect. That looks great. That's fine. So hopefully, yeah, you guys can manage to achieve something like that whilst not beating yourselves up. Let's have a look at me achieving that, and hopefully that's going to answer any additional questions you've got. As ever, if it doesn't, pop them below. Use a timestamp references if you can, because it really helps us out. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. All right, you thought you'd had enough of me. So what we've got here is a kind of mostly 200% speed little section of me doing painting using exactly the same techniques we've done in the tutorial. I'm going to be combining them a lot. It is the strength of blending, I would say. So we're going to stipple, then we'll glaze into it. All right, so we're going to stipple it and we're going to glaze into it quite a lot here. You can see that I've already set up my palette quite carefully, and you can note that I'm really carefully sneaking off the edge. Hopefully you can label that or show us a pause screen or something. From the very edge of that wet section where I've put a shade in with Hold Your Blue, so we're already mixing all 3 techniques, I'm taking a tiny amount because I don't want to saturate my brush. I'm working a little bit wetter than normal here, and we've got a lot of questions that are about how do you get it smooth, how do you stop your stippling from looking chalky, that type of stuff. Just dilution, it's the same as normal painting. I'll be running through some frequently asked questions, so we may as well start now. Let's begin my awful multitasking skills. So D-Trail SCU, I'm trying to multitask, sorry if I get names wrong or mispronounce anything. What do you do if you get a color transition that's a bit too harsh? What's the best way to go back and adjust it? There'll be tons of harsh color transitions in this. What you see me doing is, let's say I've got a block here that I wanted to be more subtle. I'll either stipple over the bit where it's kind of gone from dark to light and try and soften that transition with stippling, which can be diluted if you want. Or I'll start a glaze past it and I'll finish a glaze into it, into the recess, drag it all the way through the area, and that'll kind of fade it really nicely. I'm using that everywhere on this. Using some cheeky masking techniques here. Masking is great, by the way, guys. You'll see me using masking tape soon. It's not just for airbrushing. It's a really weird thing in our hobby that people separate, like masking is for airbrushing. Glazing is only for painting with a normal brush. You can't do it with a dry brush. Rich Gray glazed with our dry brushes, and it's actually kind of helped inform how I did this one. So Icy Blade has asked about the consistency of paint and the general rule of thumb, the amount of layers you need to get a gradient smooth. That is a great question. It's also completely unanswerable. It depends on the strength of your paint. It depends on how close the color is to your previous color. If it's closer, it'll be easier and it'll look smoother more easily. It could take more steps, just like normal painting. You're much better off, hopefully you can pause and have a little look at my palette here. You are far better off going for a test on your palette and looking at the behavior and properties of the paint once you've mixed it. There is no ratio. Absolute waste of time trying to find a ratio, because a ratio involving a wash and a medium is going to be different to a very strong paint and water, but sometimes you're going to want to use one and sometimes you're going to want to use the other. So yeah, you'll see me testing a lot on my palette, and I'm testing with the color that I'm about to glaze or stipple or wash over exactly the same color that is my base coat. So it's a perfectly relevant test. So you can see me washing the entire area like we did in the tutorial. That really does help tie things together. And again, it's just a little bit of trickery to make things look a little bit smoother than they are. Kiba 3D prints and paints. Very in-depth question here about saturated stuff. Use a glaze. It's the really compact answer. That glaze all over, the reason that we're doing it is to bring that saturation in, because you can end up a little bit chalky at the end. There is no ratio. That's the answer. There isn't a ratio like that. If you want stuff to stay vibrant, glazes are your friend. It's exactly what I'm doing with Huldra here. Pick a color that doesn't have great coverage, that does have brilliant color, like Huldra Blue, a deep saturated one normally, thin it right down and pop it all over the area. And that'll really help, keep the vibrancy on the go. So you can see a lot of what I'm doing here isn't massively neat. It's up to you guys whether you want to go for smoother than this, of course. I don't think here it matters, and I think a lot of the time kind of the interest you get from it, especially once you've hidden it with an edge highlight, it just renders it not particularly something that I'd say you should worry about, especially for army painting. Jim Eccles, good question here. Would you use different techniques for organic or inorganic effects? For example, blending on the flesh or pustules of a plague bearer versus a power weapon? I absolutely would. Power weapon, you want smoother. It's meant to look inorganic, so you don't want those imperfections as much. So I just go slower, dilute it more, maybe use a less strong paint, more steps, that type of stuff. But you can still hide things with an edge, or you could put lightning over a mistake, or something like that. Stefan 222, this is a good one. So the bottom section of this example picture he's provided is stippled and the top section is glazed. They've been done using the same paints. He's asked why the bottom section looks more dull, more desaturated, and the top section looks more vibrant. It's just the nature of the technique. How you fix it, which is exactly what we're doing, a lot of people have the same questions and I'm going to have the same answer. We popped a glaze over the top, so that's what I do on your example there. Just the glazing you did on the top, do it on the bottom over your stippling. Don't do it too thick, you'll kind of delete that nice interesting pattern that you've got from the stippling that's appropriate for the sea. But yeah, thin glaze over the top and you'll bring up the vibrancy. Vicky, hey Vicky, asking about stopping it look grainy. It's the same questions again and again, isn't it? Glaze over the top and decide whether it matters that it's grainy, all right? You'll see later, I'll pull attention to it and hopefully Ian can pop something on the screen now, like please put an unflattering zoomed in picture up, Ian. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's interesting. Maybe it looks kind of cool. If you want it smoother though, more dilution, more steps, you could use a weaker color and you could use more colors on the way to your final highlight one. So, you could, instead of jumping from like black to gray to white, you could do like a couple of steps in between or something like that. Another question about consistency, paint and layers, and how to know to stop and fix when you went too far. Fixing's really easy. Stippling, break up those transitions like we did on our fixing mistakes video and like we've done a lot here. And then the glazing through it, I'd really recommend. And remember, you can mix them. You can do a more diluted stipple, which is also a glaze, and it could have a wash in there, just like we started with. And that's gonna be less opaque, so it's more forgiving. If you got a mistake, it's about, think of like a silhouette of someone trying to be camouflaged. The moment you put like trees sticking out from them, you've broken that shape of a human. So if you've got a wobbly line, like a tidal mark or something, then you just try and break up the contour of that line. Right, masking now. Make sure if you do this, you remove some of the kind of original stickiness on some clothing or something. This is what's going to allow us to stipple a hard line. Now, I could have painted a straight line with layering, but stippling likes going over stippling. It will behave better. So if you've ever stippled on top of layering, particularly if the layering's gone too thick, you end up getting some weird results. Stippling on top of stippling is best, so this mask is what's allowed us to kind of start in the right way. King O'Fran 888, how to do our own glazes, water to paint ratio, test on your palette. See all my tests, there's so many there, right? There's like 20 different tests on my palette. That's what you're going for, and do an actual test on the palette. Thinner or medium or water or whatever. You can use whichever. If you put a bit of medium in there, you're less likely to get tidal marks, but it will take longer to dry. Either is fine, it's just probably personal preference. If you're doing a really thin one, I think probably water, because it'll pretty much be dry before you finish, which just lets you go faster. Also, if you're on a matte surface and you use a medium that isn't matte, like Lamian medium, you might get tidal marks that aren't paint. They're like a satin tidal mark over a matte base, which sometimes doesn't look great. You can see we stippled our first transition here, and this is the one that I wanted to pull reference to that I mentioned earlier. This isn't going to be particularly smooth. I just don't think it matters. Not for this one anyway. You know, I've made that decision artistically. Don't know what you guys think of it. You can let us know in the comments. I think it looks great. So yeah, we kind of accepted that was going to happen and have rolled with it. And then we're going to put some highlighting on the cracks and it'll hide everything and make it look smoother than it is anyway. What paints are suited to glazing from Teeny Tiny Victories on the IG? Really good questions. Hold Your Blue, I'll use as an example. It's a very strong color, but it's not strong paint. So it's deep, it's dark, it's saturated, and they've not mixed any white or black in with it. So these are perfect paints for glazing. You'll know them because they probably don't cover well. Old Dark Angels Green, classic example. But if you think of Mephisto Red, that covers so well because they dumped a load of black in it. If you think of like more something like Evil Sun Scarlet or something like that, it doesn't cover as well because they haven't. But often it's those deep, dark, saturated kind of shadowy colors that are going to do a really good job of it. So if it's an amazing coverage paint, it's going to be harder to glaze with, especially as like a beginner or an intermediate. Stippling has to be top, but the surfaces become rough. Thin it more. All the rules you got for normal painting. Oh, removing masking tape, right? All the rules you got for normal painting, just thin it more. The same. Take more steps, take your time, don't rush it. And yeah, don't have too much on the brush. Put less on, take less off. Same as all of our dry brushing. We're not going to saturate our brush. We're not going to use a silly three-dimensional texture palette that like plows paint into the middle of the brush. Careful, flat surface, monitor it, and keep your brush at 90 degrees. Try and take just for the tip. You want like the front 2 mils, the end 2 mils of your bristles to have paint on, but that's about it really. Wet blending, good question, Madman Miniatures. We actually did a little bit in here. You can see me using it on some of the areas. I'll like put down in the shadow a little splodge of paint, then I'll just fuzz it out quickly with my brush. So we're hiding multitudes of sins with a nice little edge highlight. See, my masking wasn't perfect there, so I'm just going to have to kind of paint in the blanks. Again, this is a perfect example, right? Things weren't spot on. I'm just hiding it behind a line. Don't fix it. We don't have time for that. We're going to do this anyway, so don't fix mistakes and then cover them with a, you know, step 3 when you're on step 2 trying to fix step 2. Just not worth doing. I think we might have some wet blending coming up. There you go. So you can see that I've just blobbed down some thick paint and I just quickly fuzzed it out with a wet brush. These cracks are brilliant on this model. I picked it for a reason. It's got details, kind of breaking it up. You could use decals like this. You could use chipping like this. Again, with chipping, if you've made a mistake on the edge of something, just make sure you chip there. It's like putting tufts on a base on an area that you want to hide. Like, if anything, it'll help you do things randomly. So you can see that there's a little bit of texture that I've built up here on the white. I don't think on a model of this size it matters that much. As you go lighter and whiter, by their nature, paints get more chalky, so take your time on the final steps. You can use a really strong, like a dot of a bold titanium white in with another white to make it stronger. Dilute it heavily, maybe drop to a smaller brush, just take your time a little bit. Using a 00S here, by the way. There we go, that's it. Hopefully you liked it. Give this a go, guys. You'll be really surprised what you can achieve. Don't worry about it being smooth originally, and feel free to share your results or your questions with us. Thank you very much for tuning in. Happy hobbying.